Hello, everyone. My name is Adele Fitzgerald, and I am the Electronic Resources Librarian at St. Joseph's College in New York. And on behalf of the NASIG Continuing Education Committee, I'd like to welcome you to our April webinar, Academic Writing and Publishing, presented by Eleanor Cook and Maria Collins. Before the presentation, I have a few quick announcements. First, this webinar will be recorded, and anyone who registered for the webinar will receive a link to the recording via email shortly following the webinar. Second, if you have any questions for Eleanor and Maria during the presentation, please enter them into the WebEx Q&A box located at the lower right corner of the WebEx window. If you cannot see the Q&A box, click on the Q&A icon in the upper right corner of the WebEx window. It should appear then in the lower right corner. And Eleanor and Maria will answer your questions at the end of the presentation. Finally, when the webinar is over, you will be redirected to a survey about the webinar. I hope that you will take a few minutes to fill it out and let us know how we're doing, what we can do better, and to share ideas for future webinars. And with that, I will introduce our speakers for today. Maria Collins is the Head of Acquisitions and Discovery at North Carolina State University Libraries and has served in a variety of roles at NCSU for over 10 years. Eleanor Cook has worked in the library field for over 30 years and is currently Assistant Director for Discovery and Technology Services at Joyner Library at East Carolina University. So now I'm going to turn things over to Eleanor and Maria, and we're going to start with Eleanor. Let me just give Eleanor the controls. Okay, hello Eleanor.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
I can hear you fine. If anybody has any trouble hearing, just put it in the chat and I'll try to help you.
Okay. All right. I'm waiting to see if anybody does, but at any rate, I want to thank Adele and her colleagues with the NASIG Continuing Education Committee for the opportunity to present this. Maria and I did a full pre-conference at the NASIG conference in June of 2016. And this webinar is a condensed version of that, very condensed. It's only an hour. So if you are interested in more about this topic, when the NASIG Proceedings is published, you will be able to read the summary of that pre-conference. In addition, we have a bibliography that you'll be getting a link to that's on the NASIG slide share from that conference. So both Maria and I will mention some of the resources from that bibliography while we're talking today. Okay, so today's agenda looks like this. We're going to talk about getting started, types of scholarly writing, where to publish, developing good writing habits, the peer review process, and general expectations, the mechanics of writing. And we're going to do this in an hour, so we're going to have to go fast. Okay, so many of you that are in this webinar are probably already doing some writing. In fact, I see people that have registered that I think are probably pretty expert at writing. But regardless, you may get some tips from here. But this is really geared toward the new writer. If you're expected to write for promotion and tenure, and this is your first tenure track job, then you really do need to think about, why am I doing this? On the other hand, there may be some of you who want to write, you like to write, and it's not expected for your job, but you still want to contribute. So you ask yourself, what am I going to write about? Well, think about your professional experiences and what you have to share. What can you do, what can you write about that would benefit other people? Also, you would like to ask yourself, am I going to be better alone or working collaboratively? And also to pick research projects that interest you, and also those that you think you could do a good job with. All right, so how do you get started? Well, I always think it's good to start small. Don't make your first writing assignment a giant research project. Unless you can join in a group project where you can learn about that, the best thing to do is start small. Book reviews, letters to the editor, and conference reports are all really good ways to stick your foot in the water, so to speak, or your toe in the water. They can be enjoyable, they can be short, and they can give you a sense of accomplishment without having to spend a tremendous amount of time on it. Those are some of the ways you can get started. NASIG, for example, if you are planning to come to the conference, are always soliciting reporters for sessions. That is something that you will get a byline for, and it would be published. Now, it's not necessarily peer-reviewed, but it's a way to get started. I also mentioned group projects before. That's a really good way to get started. All right, the next thing is, where do I get the time? Most of us are very busy. If you have a family, if you have other obligations other than work, you are probably wondering, how in the world am I going to do this? But it's like exercising. I know some of us don't do that as often as we'd like either, but you've got to learn to fit it in. If it's important to you, you will. Some institutions provide research leave, but this is increasingly rare. However, if you do work at a tenure track position and you can get research time, definitely take it. It's a good idea to find a place in your home where you can carve out some space for yourself, even if it's a closet. I mean, really, you can find a place and make it yours. There's a book called The Right to Write, which I recommend if you're a new writer. It gives a lot of ideas and inspiration for how to ramp up your writing. And one of the exercises there is called morning writing, where you get up in the morning and you can either record something a dream you've remembered, or something that you're thinking about the day that's coming on, or if you're not a morning person and you just say to yourself, there's no way I would ever do that, maybe your writing could be an evening writing. It's like keeping a journal. It helps you just get the practice of writing. It doesn't necessarily have to go anywhere, but it helps you just get used to doing it. So basically, you don't have to have the perfect setup. You don't have to be required to be in the mood, and it is not necessary to be perfect. Mostly, you just need to do it. All right, so what kind of writing are we talking about here? We're not talking about writing the great American novel. We're talking about scholarly writing. All right, so basically, and Maria will go into more depth about some of these traditional publication types. Journal articles, be they peer-reviewed or not, book chapters, full-length books. I wouldn't recommend starting with that. Columns within a journal. Most of the time, columns are not peer-reviewed, but it depends on the journal. Published proceedings and book reviews, I've mentioned those. And then some other types of works include annotated bibliographies. Librarians are famous for doing these. They take a subject and then they work each entry has a little bit about each thing, so that you get a sense of what's the best of that particular topic. Review articles like the ones that Library Resources and Technical Services publish, the best of acquisitions, the best of cataloging, etc. That's a really good type of contribution that is appreciated. And then if you have language abilities and you can do a translation of something that needs translating, that can be very useful. Newer types of scholarship, which are also appreciated and can count, include multimedia works, blog posts, self-published books, which are surprisingly more accepted these days, digital products, videos, listserv posts that are particularly of note, and other kinds of social media posts and notes. If anybody has any other suggestions of something to add to this list, I would appreciate hearing about it. Okay, then there's answering calls for proposals. If you are a member of the serials list, listserv, or any of the other ones, you've probably seen these calls for proposals. And what happens is an experienced editor, usually a freelancer, will work a contract with one of the major publishers and will come up with a book topic, and then we'll will solicit contributions for that book. What you need to know about that, and that's where it says caveat on the slide, is that if you answer that call for proposal and pitch your idea for a contribution, and if that editor then agrees that you should go ahead and write that, it is not necessarily the case that that contribution is going to get included in the book. You need to be very clear about understanding that, because, and have a plan B, because I did this one time. I went through one of these, and I thought when she said it was going to be, that it would be accepted, it wasn't. But I was lucky because I had another place in mind to put it, and it was accepted to the second place. So just be careful if you do that. Proceedings proposals are generally a little safer, because if you've done a presentation and you're expected to put a contribution into the proceedings, they're usually going to take it unless there's some real problem with it. So that's a little safer. Calls for articles and chapters, again, it depends on who the editor is. And special themed issues are also a good place to inquire. If you have a particular area of interest or expertise, you might ask to see if you could be included in something like that. Another place you can get published is through committee work, where a particular product is being worked on by a committee. An example of that is ACRL has a committee that works on a trends article every year, and that gets published. And then once you've started networking and people know who you are, you may actually get invitations to publish if they know that you are an expert on a particular topic. All right, and then in terms of academic writing, time management really depends on the type of the project. Set realistic goals. If you're working with co-authors, you have to build in more time, because everybody has to have time to do their part. We all know we work to deadlines, but don't let that get out of hand, because otherwise you'll rush and it might be not so good that way. Be mindful of the timeliness of your topic. If you're writing about medieval history, you might be able to take all the time in the world. But in the academic library field, a lot of what we do, especially if it's related to technology, is a fast-moving type of environment. You don't want to be languishing too long on a topic if it's going to be out of date. Maria will talk more about the, how you manage your outline, and if you are writing for promotion and tenure, you need to be very mindful of whether or not your committee reviewing you are going to be expecting that your publications are already published, or whether or not they're okay with it being a publication being accepted and soon to be published. So that's an important aspect you have to be concerned with. It's always a good idea to honor the deadlines and communicate well with your editors. And if you're working within IRB timeframe, which Maria is going to talk more about, you have to factor that in as well. And IRB, if you don't know, it stands for Institutional Research Board. And if you are working with human subjects, you will have to deal with that. Okay, and speaking of promotion and tenure, we could do an entire workshop on just that, but I'm just going to mention this for those of you who have this as part of your writing expectations. You have to know what's expected from your particular system. It is your responsibility to explore this, ask questions, read your promotional documentation from your institution, talk to your supervisor, your director, get a mentor, and if collaboration is encouraged, find colleagues to work with that already know the ropes. And most of all, get to know the culture. The promotion and tenure system at your university is not exactly the same as it is at mine. every institution, no matter how formalized it is, have different cultural expectations. In some places, it's all about quantity. They want you to have X number of peer-reviewed articles, and if you don't have X number of peer-reviewed articles, you won't get tenure. In other places, it's a little more fluid. So you just have to figure this out. And you can't just sit there and say nothing. You have to ask. And there's a lot of studies that suggest that people who don't engage with their colleagues about this sort of thing are the ones that oftentimes aren't successful at their promotion or tenure. The ability to successfully collaborate is one of those qualities that some places really value. In other places, they really want you to be the one to do all the work, and they don't care about whether or not you co-author. In some places, they want you to publish about things related to your work. In other places, if you have other subject knowledge or interest, you can publish in those areas as well, even if it's not related to your work. It's always a good idea, if you can, to look at successful colleagues' dossiers who've recently received promotion and tenure. It gives you an idea of what it's supposed to look like. And they often have workshops on campuses that talk about how to do this. And, of course, maintaining balance in your life and trying to not let this consume you is also a challenge. But you will need to know whether or not you're supposed to establish a research agenda or how exactly you're supposed to do this. All right, so if you work at a library that doesn't expect you to do any of this, but you're still at this workshop this afternoon, this webinar, the reason you're here may be a very different reason. For one thing, you may not stay at your present job forever. So if you start publishing now, it might actually help you land a position at another academic library or at a future academic library if that's not where you are now. Writing exposes you to a wider network of professionals in your area of expertise. If you write something that people are interested in, you might be surprised next time you're at a conference that somebody walks up to you and says, "Oh, I just read that thing you wrote. That was really good. Tell me more about that." And so if you are not expected to write where you work now, then you can write whatever you want to. All right, here are some examples of places to publish within the traditional technical services realm, which is what I'm assuming most of the people at this webinar are coming from. These are not all of the journals, but these are the most commonly known ones and the ones that are most respected, at least in my opinion. You can take this with you and take a look at that. All right, so what else can you do? Networking, for example, is a good way to take advantage of your connections in the field. Oftentimes you can find writing opportunities from who you know. Now, that may seem like a pretty obvious thing, but once you've done a project with one person, if you've been successful doing it, then you may find that you either want to work with that person again or you might meet other people through that person. Again, establishing a mentor, not just for writing, but in general, can also introduce you to other opportunities. Maria will also talk about this some, about developing good habits, meeting deadlines, dealing with procrastination and writer's block. There's some really good resources in the bibliography about that. Plagiarism and other ethical issues, even though librarians are the ones that usually are preaching about this to our classes, we ourselves can fall into these pitfalls too, so we have to be mindful of that. And participating in a writing support group, or at least having trusted colleagues read your draft, is a good idea. And about writing groups, many campuses have them already established. There may even be an independent group in your region, although you'll need to check to see, because many of those are for fiction writers and creative writers, and so that might not be right up your alley. You may have a writing group in your library, and if you don't, you might even consider starting your own or going virtual in some fashion. With writing groups, it's important to stay on task but be flexible. You don't want it to turn into something that is not a writing group, which is easy to do if you're socially friendly with the people in the group. Know what the group's goals are, be accountable, and definitely with writing groups it's important to both give constructive feedback and also learn to take constructive feedback. Okay, so I believe this is where we're going to do the handoff and where Maria will pick up.
Yes, and I'll go ahead and pass the slides over to Maria.
All right, thank you.
You got it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Let's see. I've got it. I'm good. Let's see. I'm Maria Collins. Thanks, Eleanor, for your part. My perspective for the presentation is based on my experience as editor of Serials Review. So during my portion, I'm going to go over information about the peer review process, as well as discuss some best practices for academic writing. Before I jump straight to the peer-reviewed article, I would like, though, to make a few editor-related notes about some of the scholarly writing types that Eleanor mentioned earlier. So I'm going to begin with columns. Folks contributing to columns often work with a separate editor than the journal editor, and if you have ideas for that column, often there's like brief descriptions on the journal masthead and those kinds of things, or even online on the website about what the scope of each column is, and then the column editor will be listed. Please feel free to reach out and contact that column editor if you have an idea. They're always willing to accept ideas. Please note that writing styles for each individual column, even possibly within the same journal, might vary. So some columns are going to be informal and use first person, others are going to be more formal. So you need to check in with the column editor on the style. Columns are not typically peer-reviewed, but can have very high visibility. So columns for Serials Review often have the highest number of downloads. Book reviews, folks should feel free to contact the book review editor if they are interested in contributing, just like for the columns. Note that book reviews vary in length, so some are very short and some book reviews are longer. For example, in Serials Review, our book reviews tend to be like 3 to 5 double-spaced pages. Editorials, many journals solicit or are willing to entertain guest editorials. Editorials are really good for opinion or thought pieces, so if for some reason you're not interested in the rigor of a peer-reviewed article, then this might be a good option for you. And then invited articles are typically not peer-reviewed, but they do share a lot of the same features as a peer-reviewed article, and revisions, though, are still going to be required by the editor. So invited articles are often part of a special issue or series. So let's move on to the peer-reviewed article. The process for peer-reviewed articles includes these general steps that I've listed here. So just for context, I want to go over so that we have sort of a shared context. There's the initial feedback period for the author as they flesh out their idea for the paper, which may or may not include the editor of the journal, but please do feel free to reach out to the editor to see if your idea makes sense for that journal, if it's in scope. I always welcome requests that come to me that way. Once the paper is written, the author will need to submit the paper to the journal according to the journal submission process. So instructions for how to do that will be on the website for the journal. Contact the editor directly as well. And if the editor does not reject the paper out of hand for being out of scope, they will initiate the peer review process by assigning reviewers and collecting comments. And if the paper moves forward after that in the acceptance process, comments submitted by the peer reviewers and the editor should, of course, be used by the author to make revisions. I will see occasionally a paper resubmitted that really is the same paper. So please do try your best to incorporate those comments. So if the paper is accepted, the author will begin working with the publisher directly to complete the final stages of determining author rights and answering queries from compositors to work on the paper proofs. The paper finally will be published, and for some publishers, that article is available actually as soon as the proofs are finished, and even before the editor makes an issue assignment. So one example of this is Taylor and France's Article First program. The most common research methods for peer-reviewed articles in our field, the library and information science field, include surveys, how we did at good papers, literature reviews and interviews, research studies as well. I would say that in general, surveys are a really good approach to pulling in a broader perspective on your topic. You will want to make sure, of course, to get feedback on the survey questions and make sure they get at what you're after. And you also want to make sure you test your survey before you begin. But likewise, interviews can also prove really useful for providing that kind of broader context for your own work, you know, that you would like to highlight, or just to even provide additional descriptive information about something in the field, such as a new system or a process. As an editor, I've really seen a really wide range of variation in how folks use all of these methods. I would suggest that if you're getting started in academic writing, that you begin with a method that's most comfortable to you. So please don't feel like that just because you took your research methods class and you feel like you should do some kind of statistical analysis, but you hate math, please don't feel like you need to start in that way. Frankly, in the library science field, often the most read publications are often those that are very practical in nature rather than a more narrow research study focused on statistical significance. So consequently, I would argue that case studies are a very helpful approach to an article. I would just simply caution folks to step beyond your local experience to answer questions like, why is this important? What takeaways do I want readers to have when they read my paper? Essentially, writers should do their best to answer the so what question. Not taking this extra step is often what folks find limiting about what we did at good types of papers. So writing is an opportunity really to share your experiences, to build upon the body of work in our field. So please do not be scared off from writing because of a fear of a research method. Reach out to colleagues and editors to build out a good approach for tackling your idea. If your research involves people, including surveys or interviews, then you'll need to work with your organization's institutional review board or IRB. So this process may cause a time delay for your research, but it's a required step to take. So the IRB process serves three purposes. The first is to protect the rights and welfare of the people or the human subjects that are part of your study. The second is to ensure compliance with institutional policy and federal regulations. And the third is to educate institutional personnel on the ethical use of folks. So broadly speaking, researchers are learning to be stewards of trust with the human subjects that are involved in their studies. If you're not sure how to go about the IRB process, consult with your university's sponsored research office if you have one, or even promotion and tenure committee if you have one of those. If you're a PNT shop, you can consult with your supervisors, your colleagues. You can reach out to folks you know, authors you know at other institutions, and they should be able to help you. Organizations, especially research universities, often have resources to assist with this process. I've noted in the slide a useful FAQ from Cornell, but a quick search at your own organization site will probably have additional details related to your organization's process. So do be prepared for a delay of like 4 to 6 weeks. Note again that any research conducted with human subjects requires IRB. For social sciences research, I realize that this is often overkill. You'll see when you complete the forms too, but going through the review does force you to clarify your goals for your writing project. Also, journalistic non-research pieces that consult with experts in the field often do not require IRB, but if you're in doubt, please do consult with your campus's research office. So once you've submitted your paper to a journal, what are the general expectations of the peer review process itself? So this process should be anonymous. This is called blind or double-blind review, where the author and the reviewers are not identified to each other. An author should expect objective, honest feedback about their paper, hopefully delivered in a timely manner. I will note reviewers are often not paid for their efforts and have to make time in their day to perform this service, so there can be some lag time if additional reviewers are needed to step in when the original reviewer has trouble meeting their deadlines. Often the feedback to the author comes in the form of a narrative assessment of whether or not the article is in scope, so the validity of the research, whether or not the article contributes to the literature, what needs to be improved in the paper. Other kinds of feedback might be things that are missing in the paper. You'll get some positive feedback about what's working in the paper, areas that are confusing, additional literature that you need to consider, validity of the statistics. I often reach out to someone who's really good at statistics to provide that feedback, and then, of course, the originality of the paper. So an author should not expect extensive copy editing of their manuscript, even though some reviewers do prefer to make comments directly within the paper. You may also find as an author that there are some reviewer comments that you do not agree with. However, I have thought that if authors are open to reviewer suggestions, there really is a tremendous improvement in the quality of the article. It's also not uncommon for reviewers to disagree with one another about their recommendation of whether or not to accept paper. So often I'll have a tiebreaker review that I will consider as I make my decision. So authors are expected to submit their article to one journal at a time and to make sure that the article is publication ready, which I would like to emphasize this point. The paper should be in its final form before submission. Suggestions will be given during the editorial process to improve the manuscript, but if the article is unreadable or poorly written, it will be rejected. An author should also be sure to respond to all reviewer comments, and if they disagree, they should communicate to the editor why certain suggestions were not incorporated into the revisions. This is an example of a response to reviewer comments that was submitted as part of an article revision. Note that many journals do require a response to reviewer comments when you resubmit your paper or your revisions. I think this example is a great way to handle a response by simply noting how you addressed each revision request one at a time. Beyond submitting revisions in a timely manner, an author should also submit proofs back to the publisher in a timely manner, and authors need to also consider the author rights that they would like to retain post-publication. This chart from Taylor and Francis, I think, is a good one. It details several common types of license agreements. You have a copyright agreement, which is the more traditional type of agreement that assigns copyright of an article to the publisher or society, they would be the ones responsible for the intellectual property rights for the article. There's also an exclusive license to publish. This is a situation where you're granting the journal owner the right to publish the paper on an exclusive basis, but you, as the author, retain copyright. And reuse rights for these kinds of things, or reuse requests, are handled by the publisher or the society. And finally, many publishers allow for Creative Commons agreements that allow the author to retain copyright while allowing others to make use of that work. I'm not going to review each kind of Creative Commons license, but we'll note that the creativecommons.com website offers a great explanation of each type of agreement. They even have tutorials to help you figure out which one might be good for you. And depending on the publisher that you're working with, you may or may not have all of these options. I'll note that it's important as an author to determine how you feel about these options, as this may affect your decision about where and how to publish. A peer reviewer really should be assessing the quality of your writing. So here are a few examples of the kinds of questions a reviewer might consider. Is the article interesting to read? Would the reader understand the article? Does the content flow from one section to another? Does the writing style match that of the journal? Authors should do their best to eliminate like filler words and phrases in their writing. You should try to consider dissenting points of view if that's appropriate for your paper, and obviously present the paper in a structured form that's easy to follow. Reviewers are going to potentially comment on these areas as well. An editor, a journal editor, manages the submission process for the journal, including managing the journal scope. And so they do that by soliciting content for the journal. They determine if submitted content is a good fit. They will consult with an editorial board to determine direction and come up with special issues or special ideas. They'll manage their column editors and coordinate column topics as needed. They might have an associate editor that helps with some of this as well. The editor also performs an initial review of manuscripts and may reject a submission outright if the paper is not ready for review or is considered to be out of scope. So editors also assign and follow up, obviously, with the reviewers. They'll collate and contribute their own feedback, so all of that is submitted in a package back to the author, and they'll make a final decision about acceptance of the manuscript. Editors submit the final product, publication ready, to the compositors on the publishing team. Editors may or may not review proofs, but this is often the author's responsibility. And editors will determine the order of the articles within an issue and, of course, write editorials as needed. A publisher's role is to prep the article for publication. The publisher will provide a modest level of copy editing according to their style sheets. They'll handle composition of the article, and this includes the layout, handling the figures and the tables. The publisher also manages the proofing process. They obtain appropriate author rights and documentation, and they'll publish the content as agreed upon. So these processes are often managed using a journal submission system. These are just a few suggested best practices that an author should consider as they begin their writing project. Most important is that authors write about what interests them. If you write something that you know about or a problem you're trying to solve, then you'll be more motivated to complete your project. You can also organize and provide structure, should organize and provide structure to your thoughts. A writing plan might help, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You should, of course, share your work with others and get feedback. As I mentioned earlier, testing surveys is always a good idea before you send it out to a larger group. You should do your best to meet your deadlines, and if you can't meet your deadlines, please do communicate with the editor to let them know if you can't meet your deadlines. I would also recommend, especially the first time out the gate, writing with a co-author. This is good to sort of share the stress of this kind of a writing project. They provide extra support. They help share the labor. You have someone to talk to. Another thing that I can't emphasize enough is that you need to revise your work, especially for clarity. Even the best writers revise their work over and over and over again. So, ask yourself when you're looking over what you've completed, what am I trying to say? Have I said it? If someone new to the field reads this, will they understand it? So I just want to go over a few common writing mistakes that I often see during the editorial process. Some papers have no defined purpose. The author doesn't know what they want to say, or maybe they just fail to identify the problem, or they might define the problem later on in the paper. So a reader might have to read half the paper before they figure out what the paper is actually about. I find that this often happens when authors choose style over function. So, and sometimes papers have a lot of detail, and this can also cause them to lack focus. So there's just a lot going on. Some papers lack structure, so the paper is not organized, and it might be sort of a stream of consciousness kinds of things. And having extra structure is good. It's not boring, it's not bad, especially in this type of writing, it's a good thing. Many case studies that I see are presented as local stories only, and they don't have that broader context. So this kind of context really can be created through literature reviews. You can get global perspective by using your interviews, your surveys, data. All of these kinds of things help create that context for your local story. Many papers also might fail the so what test. So these are the papers that don't clearly state how they actually contribute to the literature. And then you have a few papers that I've seen that are overly opinionated, so they aren't objective. And then you have sometimes the issue of papers that aren't accurate, so try not to exaggerate or guess. Too often, the author will make the reader work to figure out what they're trying to say, and just be explicit, be very direct. The reader should never have to guess what your intent is. Some papers are incomplete when they're submitted, so the author might fail to follow the journal guidelines or the suggested style guides, or submit an unfinished manuscript. So try to make sure to follow instructions and make sure the manuscript is complete. Other common problems in writing that I see are simple sort of English 101 kinds of problems, changing person about the paper, like I, you, and they, and then inconsistent use of tense, so past and present, and then also inconsistent mood. So sometimes the paper will be really casual, and then it'll change to be very formal. So those kinds of things should be reconciled. Here's just a quick example of a writing plan. The writing plan here is just a way to help you try to figure out how you might approach the paper. I think this kind of tool is really helpful. So you answer all these kinds of questions up front, and then as you begin to write your paper, you know what your approach is going to be. So I find it's good to take the time to outline the paper, to create a writing plan, and have an idea of your approach to writing. I'd like to end with one of the sources included in our bibliography, William Zinzer's book on writing well. This book provides some great advice about academic writing. You enjoy what you write when you're interested in what you write about. I think it's important to develop synergy around who you are as a writer. This means incorporating who you are as a professional into your writing. There should be a sense of purpose to your writing, whether it be formal or informal. Zinzer talks about the best writing for you and for your reader reflects who you are, demonstrates sincerity, and should be organized and leave the reader and not leave the reader guessing. So it should be readable, it should be explained in simple ways without jargon. A few ideas for coming up with writing include writing about what you know, writing about what you need to learn about or discover, maybe problems on the job, new initiatives, future innovations, writing about problems you're trying to solve, writing about areas that are changing in your profession, writing about people you want to know more about. I know that my job as editor is often to impose structure and deadlines and that kind of thing, but the true key to enjoying academic writing is to figure out what interests you. Folks like me can help you with the rest. Academic writing really is a great way to contribute back to the profession and to push forward ideas within our discipline. And that's all I have for my portion of the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria and Eleanor. And now we can open up the floor for questions. If you want to ask any questions, go ahead and pop them into the Q&A area, and then or the chat, but the Q&A is preferred. And we'll just wait a few minutes to see what kind of questions come in. And the presenters are kind enough to share the slides with us, so I will email those out as well as the recording when it's available.
And Adele?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
And also you will send them an email with the bibliography.
Yes, I think someone sent that in an email to me. Let me see if I can go pick that up right now.
I did.
Okay, because I could pop it into the chat too. They can get that from there as well. Oh, there it is. Hang on, let me get the link to the slide share. Okay, so link to.
I guess there's one other thing. This is Eleanor again, that I would be willing, if I think Maria would be too, that if anybody wants to ask us questions after the webinar, just by sending us an email, they're welcome to do that as well.
Okay.
Sometimes people are shy about asking their questions in front of other people.
Yes. I don't see any questions coming in. I do have one. Oh, here's one from Ginny. If you're in a staff position and publishing isn't specifically rewarded, what strategies might be recommended for building support?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Well, this is Maria. One thing that I've had a few staff members at State who have done some writing, and that can be a tricky thing. I think you need to negotiate with your supervisor to make sure that, see if you can get any kind of resources, a little bit of flexibility in your schedule or those kinds of things. I think writing about things that also are related to your job is another really good strategy that might help, because then that thing that what you're writing about can be directly applied to improve your work performance. So those kinds of things are usually can be an effective strategy. But do be clear with your supervisor so that you so those parameters, those boundaries are set about what they're going to allow you to do on the job and what's not. I think that can be a tricky space.
I'll add to that that if you're a staff member at a library where you're also working on a degree, if you are allowed to be a collaborator on a group project and that project can be published, that's a very good move for your personal, professional career as you are working on your degree. And I've certainly seen a number of cases where people got those opportunities and it did help them in becoming more, if you're already published and you're just getting your MLS, that's pretty good.
Okay, I see another question from Toledo. Are you aware of any predatory journals in the area of librarianship?
I am not aware of any titles. I think you would pretty much have to look up maybe the Beals list, which I think is going to be held up by, was it Cobble? I think they're going to take that over. So I'm not sure of any titles. I do think there are some resources out there that might reveal what some of those are. I think if you look at a journal, if you get a solicitation to contribute to a title, I would just double check with folks in the field and make sure that it is reputable. You know, Regina would probably have a fit if I say this, but, you know, does it have ISSN? Things like that, that sort of make sure that it's a formalized publication. That's a tricky one.
Yeah, I don't think I know of any off the top of my head that I could name. I know that I've received email solicitations from journals that claim to be social science oriented, but they were not specifically library science. And I think that our profession is so tight knit that if somebody started one, we'd all hear about it because we have colleagues in our field that would jump on it. And not necessarily, you know, the one person who started that list. It could be a number of other people I can think of who, if they heard about such a thing, they would be writing about it and talking about it. So if any of you do hear about anything like that, we need to know.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have a question for you. As far as copyright goes, would the journal publisher ever play a role in choosing which copyright was applied, or does that always go to the author?
No, I mean, the publisher is going to determine what their copyright policies are. Okay. And then, so the more commercial publishers are probably going to have the most restrictive copyright. I think there's give, and I think there is room for authors to negotiate, but they'll set their policies, and then an author, I will have authors, for example, for Serials Review, that will, they'll be writing about open access. And so what they do, and Serials Review has a hybrid policy, but you have to pay an author pay charge in order for your article to become open access. But in the social sciences, there's no money. So what those folks will do, and what I will do for them as editor, is I will negotiate with Taylor and Francis to waive those fees so that those articles can be open access. It does not always happen, but for the most part, I find that publishers are fairly reasonable. I think they are, commercial publishers are trying to experiment and expand to different models. It's just it's a sort of a tricky space.
No, thank you. I do have another question. Do you use any time management tools? That's one of my own personal problems here. I have no time. So.
I have tried to use, this is Maria again, I've tried to use all kinds of apps. For me, the best thing for me is just lists of stuff. And I'll sort of, there's a great book called Getting Things Done. I can't remember the author right now, but he suggests some really good strategies for time management, and I think it's worth a read.
I would echo what Maria says. There are a number of project management tools that some people find very useful that I think are pretty well documented in our field. Trello being one of them, and there's several others like that. But for writing projects, one thing you might consider is, especially if you're working with others, is a collaborative space of some sort. For example, there's the PB Wiki. It's free. It's a free platform. I've used that several times for group projects, both writing and not writing. If you're doing collaborative writing, using Google Docs is pretty standard, I think. not sure that that answers the question about time, but it sort of gets to that.
There's only 24 in a day, I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything that can help. I've heard of that Getting Things Done book, and I didn't have time to read it. As I'm sure many of us have the same issue there. But yeah, that's my ongoing problem. You mentioned invited articles are not peer-reviewed?
It depends on the journal.
Okay. So I wasn't aware of that. That's interesting. Okay. So an invited article could appear in a peer-reviewed journal, but it may not be peer-reviewed?
I'll give you an example.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I recently submitted an interview, and it's an article, and it was invited, but it won't be peer-reviewed. It will be in a journal that's a peer-reviewed journal, but not every single thing in a peer-reviewed journal is always subject to peer review.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. So how would I know? Just because it's an interview and that would be the trigger? That
I think so. I think so. Columns, I think Maria said columns and interviews and that sort of writing, those are often left out of the peer review process.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you. Let's see. So I put in the chat window a link to this slide share that was provided to me. There's a bibliography located there. So hopefully everybody sees that in the chat window. And we have a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to.
This is Maria. I'm back.
Hi, you okay?
Yes.
Oh, that's tough to talk while you're choking. The recording.
I think we both did the same thing.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I just muted myself because I was coughing.
Okay.
Yeah, my phone actually died, so I had to switch over to a different phone.
Oh boy, what timing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Judy says she doesn't see the bibliography. Judy, do you see?
You have to click on the chat.
In the chat, yes. There should be a chat. There's a Q&A and a chat. They're two separate windows. Hopefully I sent it to all participants.
Well, and the other thing is, if you go to the NASIG website and look under the conference archives, they have a link to the SlideShare site right there. And if you type in NASIG academic writing and publishing, you'll find the bibliography.
Oh.
So, I mean, it's possible to find it without the link, but
yes,
having the link makes it easier.
Easier this way. I was able to pop it into the Q&A also. So hopefully you can get it that way. And I'll include these links also when I send out the recording, which should be tomorrow. Oh, good. Judy got the link. Okay. Does anybody else not see the link? We have another minute if anybody has any more questions. We see we have the contact information up on the screen. Okay, well, I guess we can go ahead and finish up. Maria and Eleanor, I want to thank you very much for giving us such a great presentation. I must say I am inspired. All I have to do is find time now. And I'd like to thank all the attendees for their time. And please attend future events. We hope to see you at our next continuing education event. In May, we're going to have an introduction to sushi presentation. So that should be a good one. And then we're going to take the summer off. So with that, I'd like to thank you again on behalf of the NASIG Continuing Education Committee, and we hope to see you all again soon. Okay, have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
All right,
Thank
you.